Rise of Kingdoms is no stranger to power creep, and lately the community has been talking a bit more about power creep in the game. So today we're going to break down exactly what power creep actually is, the bad and a little bit of good that comes from power creep, but most importantly, how can you as a player still succeed in Rise of Kingdoms despite power creep being an inevitability? So stay tuned for that. But first, what's going on, guys? Cheers. Rocking the kombucha today like a hippie. I even got the tie-dye on. I didn't even mean to do that. I feel like I'm in the late 70s. Guys, as you guys know, I am a partnered creator with Rise of Kingdoms, which means if you want more Rise of Kingdoms content, subscribe down below because they do support a few videos on the channel every single month. Guys, what actually is power creep? Power creep is really just a term that is used to describe the newer content in a game being more powerful or more meta or more relevant than the older content in a game. And typically the term power creep has a sort of negative connotation to it, right? Because usually it comes up in discussions when people are talking about things that are ruining a video game. Okay, and just to be clear, power creep is not exclusive to video games. It is a phenomenon that can be found even in things like trading card games like Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh or Magic the Gathering. You can have power creep in first-person shooter games. You can have power creep in Fortnite when they release new weapons. There is power creep in many different types of competitive games, digital or otherwise. And despite it being a sort of negative thing for a game, I do think that there are still some positives that it brings with it. But why are we even talking about power creep in this video right here as it pertains to Rise of Kingdoms? Well, the answer is obvious. It's Emperor Qin. And if you guys saw my most recent tier list video, you're going to know that I feel like Emperor Qin is the strongest commander in the game, and he's kind of represents a new power level in the meta. And really, we haven't seen this that many times in the history of Rise of Kingdoms. Now, there's always a little bit of power creep, right? Like, I shouldn't say always, but there's often a little bit of power creep in the newer commanders because, you know, the developers want you to get the new stuff, but it's not always black and white. It's not always abundantly clear that a given commander is just above and beyond everybody else. In fact, the most recent time that we talked about power creep was actually when the pincer formation came out, and that was kind of the first time we talked about it with relation to formations. But prior to that, I would say King Arthur is an example of power creep, but really Zhuge Liang was certainly an example of power creep, because this was the first time that we kind of like, at the time, but mind you, this is not true now, but at the time he basically kicked YSG out of the meta, because even at 5511 he was performing as good or better. And since then YSG has gotten more relics, and now he works with Emperor Qin, and so that's not the case anymore. But like, really, you know, we were starting to wonder, like, okay, now we've got a circular AoE that's even stronger. You don't even have to expertise him to get that. Definitely a power creep commander. Prior to that was Nevsky, right? Nevsky was definitely a power creep commander. He was head and shoulders above the rest because he just had so many stats, a really strong debuff, single target damage was okay, but really like so much skill damage. He was so good, right? To the point where like people are still using Nevsky to this day. And before that, I mean, we could talk more about it, but like Alexander the Great, just, I mean, in season 2 he was just like so much better than the season 1 commanders. It's not even funny. And of course, like I said, there's smaller examples of this throughout the meta, but those are some of the big ones that I can think of. In fact, if we take a look at a list of all of the commanders in Rise of Kingdoms, what I've done here is I put in green the commanders that I feel like were kind of must-have commanders when they came into the game, at least at the time. The commanders that I put in yellow, there's only just a couple of them. These are commanders that I would say you could argue would have been must-have commanders, but maybe you could argue that they wouldn't have been. It's really up to you. But my point is that if we take a look at some of these commanders that I feel like were just definite upgrades, right? That's what I mean when they're must-haves. In my opinion, it just means that there's no question, it's clearly an upgrade over whatever you were using before. So commanders like Leo, like back in the day, like you kind of needed him with Guan Yu, but really you could run Guan Alex, right? So it's like, that's kind of why Leo is in the yellow here. And not to say that these commanders that aren't like a different color, it's not to say that they're not good. Of course, like people used Honda for a while, people used Ramses when it came out, you know, people used William Wallace, of course, right? But like, if we really narrow it down to some of the heavy hitters, the ones that like stayed in the meta for a long time, these are the commanders that are in green. I guess Harold at the time was really good. I think people forget that, but maybe I'll put him in yellow just to avoid the comments down below. But either way, Martel Harold used to slap. I used to love that. My point is that there's been a handful of commanders, even beyond just the big power creep jumps like we talked about before, Emperor Qin, Zhuge Liang, Nevsky, Alexander the Great, right? Beyond those, there's still been a handful of commanders that have been sort of like really must-haves if you want to be open field meta viable, right? But either way, let's talk a little bit about power creep and what are some of the good things that it actually brings to the game, because I think this is a aspect of power creep that people don't really talk about, right? They always talk about the negative, but they don't talk about some of the positives. And really the positives are that it's just a new toy to play with, right? It is a new thing that players can get their hands on, and for a strategy game like Rise of Kingdoms, it gives something that players can test and see like, oh, how does this work with all the things that we've already got in the game? But also, like, you want something that is stronger, faster, hits harder, right? Like, these are the things that keep people playing the game, getting things that make you feel more and more powerful, right? If you were playing a strategy game, an RPG or an MMO or whatever, and every, you know, weapon that you got as you're going through the dungeon, you get a new sword and you pick it up and it's like, this one does 70 damage and this one does 70 damage. It's like, well, that's not that exciting. Like, this one's blue and this one's red, so it's like it's cosmetic, but it doesn't even matter. You didn't need the new sword, right? So one of the good things about power creep is that it gives you something new and something exciting, and you feel more powerful when you get it, right? And that always feels good. That progression on your account feels good, and it's one of the reasons why we play Rise of Kingdoms, whether we realize it or not. That is definitely a big component. But that's kind of the good side of power creep. The bad side of power creep is when it happens too much, when it's either too frequent or the jumps are just way too big, right? That would be the downsides of power creep, because now it's not just a small strategic upgrade. Now it is a must-have upgrade where if you don't get it, you effectively cannot participate in the meta, right? A great example, and I've used this before on the channel, if you're a long time viewer, you're going to remember this, but Yu-Gi-Oh is a great example, right? And I think one of the reasons that game is kind of dead now, and I know it's still like, there's still a core fan base, but like, it for the most part it's dead, right? Like in 2003 it was popping off. It was like as big or bigger than Pokemon, and now it ain't nothing. All right, but my point is, too much power creep and making things too complicated and too powerful and too strong, and everything gets one shot, and you can't, it's just too much, right? It is simply too much. And not only does it make the game less fun, but it also often has a cost to it, right? You either have to spend a lot of time grinding for the new things, or you have to spend money, or you have to buy an expansion pack, or whatever the game might be, whatever the mechanics of the game are. Now it requires more investment from you as a player, whether it's time, money, in-game resources, whatever. So there's definitely pros and cons to power creep in Rise of Kingdoms. And if we're talking about Emperor Qin, is he one of those game breaking, oh my god, I'm gonna quit because the power creep is too strong? I think the answer is no, right? I honestly don't think so, especially if you knew what you were doing. And this is the part of the video that I think is really probably going to help a lot of people. But what you're going to notice here is in the 9th generation, we didn't really have any commanders that were must-have commanders. I think you could make the argument that Ragnar Prime was like the most standout of them all here. Maybe William Wallace if you weren't sold on the Liu Shay Alex thing, which that is a skill issue, but a lot of people like their William Wallace, so it is what it is. But really, like, you didn't need any of these commanders. Even if they were small upgrades, you didn't need them, which means you kind of had, and even before that, like, the reason that Gajamada and Cordoba are in yellow is because they are very strong. You didn't really need them, but if you're a believer in that engineering is a must-have, well, then you would argue that these are must-haves, right? And so that's why they're in yellow. But like, even before that, you could go as far back as Lapu Lapu, Gajamada, and Cordoba. Like, all of these commanders from, what is this, February of 2024 up until either King Arthur or Emperor Qin, really, these are the commanders that you really needed. And so you had about a year of saving commander sculptures, or at least you had the chance to save commander sculptures for a year if you were patient. Okay, and if you did that, and you, even if you're a free-to-play player, you would have had at least 1 or 2 commanders that you could instantly max if you had been saving for a year or maybe a little bit more, right? Now that does, if you're free to play, that does require daily logging in, grinding, doing all the events, doing all your KVKs, like all that stuff. You have to be an active, engaged player, right? And we're talking end game player, but it's possible. Of course it's possible, right? People have been doing it for years. So if you understand the things that make commanders meta in Rise of Kingdoms, you would have been able to sort of be ready for Emperor Qin, or a commander like Emperor Qin, to come into the game, and you would have immediately jumped on it and said, this, boom, this is a must-have commander. I'm gonna get them. And having the patience and knowledge to save for commanders like Emperor Qin is really what separates the really powerful free-to-play and low spenders from everybody else. Now the whales are a different story because they just buy everything, and you don't need to really be patient because oftentimes you can just max whatever you want. But one of the reasons why some free-to-play players and low spenders perform really well and other free-to-play players and low spenders can't get to that level is, I mean, there's many reasons, but one of the reasons is patience, right? You need to have patience, and you have to be willing to put in the grind. And on top of that, you have to know when that patience is going to pay off. You have to be able to identify when a commander is definitely worth getting and when a commander is definitely not worth getting, right? And the number one thing that you can do to sort of beat power creep and to sort of win despite power creep being an inevitable thing in Rise of Kingdoms, right? Because by the way, it's not going anywhere. Power creep has existed in this game and in every game since the dawn of time. It's always going to be a thing. So really what you have to understand is how to adapt and understand and learn the game to the point where you can work within the boundaries of power creep and understand where it benefits you and where it doesn't. And the biggest key and the biggest tip that I can give you is that Rise of Kingdoms is a game that rewards players for their patience, okay? And if you don't have patience, you will pay for it either with bad reports or with spending to catch up. And I forgot that I actually wrote a lot right here for Emperor Qin. It's like, I don't remember the last time I did the math, but it's like 4,000 to 5,000 or something insane. It's a damage factor equivalent because obviously he's not the same like everyone else. But anyway, if we go through here and we look at some of the commanders that, and again, this is not a tier list video. I'm not here to argue which commanders are must-haves or which commanders used to be must-haves or whatever. Like, that's not the point of the video. Don't get caught up in that. That's not really what we're here for. What is important is, are there certain things about these commanders that I've highlighted that there's similarities between them, right? Are there similarities between a lot of these commanders? And I think the answer is yes. If we look at a lot of these commanders, right, there's a few things that you're going to notice amongst many, if not all of them. The first one is obviously their damage output with their skills relative to everyone else that was available at the time, right? And if we look at Saladin, his active skill damage was about the same as other Cav commanders, but he had a lot more in his kit in terms of either stats or being tanky, or he had the support tree, which made him unique. But beyond that, right, like Alexander the Great was a crazy amount of stats. He even to this day has more stats than a lot of commanders that are coming out these days, and he still has the most march speed of any infantry commander. Guan Yu was the first 2,000 damage factor 3 target fan shaped AoE commander, right? And that is still, I mean, that is still almost part of the meta to this day. I mean, we look at commanders like Joan of Arc Prime, who is still part of the meta. Now she double casts every other turn, so it's a little apples to oranges, but you understand what I'm saying here, right? If we look at Herman Prime, he's a 2,000 damage factor 3 target. We look at CBO Prime, 2,000 damage factor 3 target. That started with Guan Yu, right? And so back then, looking at Guan Yu's damage, it was clearly like, oh yeah, you gotta get him, he's super good. So damage output relative to their peers is definitely a key to identifying whether or not a commander is good or not. And really, a lot of the commanders that we look at here in green are AoE commanders. That is a very good sign for a new commander because AoE damage in Rise of Kingdoms scales really, really well. I know there's a 15% penalty per target, but that's just not enough to compensate for the fact that you're still outputting a lot more damage, right? It is what it is. It's just how the damage formula works in the game. AoE commanders are almost always going to be lasting much longer in the meta than single target damage commanders. Now, is there a time and place for single target damage commanders? Absolutely, right? We can have discussions about, you know, swarming things down and how it helps to have that little extra single target damage rather than spreading out the damage over multiple targets. Single target damage commanders can make up for it in other ways by having a ridiculous amount of stats, or they can, you know, have huge bonuses for whoever they're paired with. Like, there's lots of things, you know, if you look at Hua Qibing, he's got a really low rage cycle for the first couple of seconds of battle. Like, there's things that they can do to keep themselves relevant. But if we were to average it out across the entire Rise of Kingdoms meta history, you're going to find that AoE commanders just last longer in the meta than non-AoE commanders. Beyond that, looking at commanders that deal all their damage in one turn, that is a really good sign for a commander. Commanders that have really powerful debuffs tend to be really, really good for the meta, right? If we look at, I mean, again, with Guan Yu, that silence really kept him relevant for a very, very long time, to the point where, depending on your matchup, I mean, I was getting good trades with Guan Yu up until Ragnar Prime came out. Like, I only upgraded to Ragnar Prime because I had the sculptures to do so, and I thought it would just be a small optimization, right? But beyond that, we had Zhang Yu with the 3 target defense reduction on the active skill. We have Nevsky's really strong 45% reduction to one target. Kind of the downside is only one target, but still great. CPO Prime 30% health reduction, AoE crazy. Boudica Prime's active skill has a debuff, makes him take more skill damage. Zhuge Liang's got a debuff. Herman Prime's got the poison stack. So really debuffs are a big component of the Rise of Kingdoms meta, because debuffs are kind of they scale way better than buffs, right? Because if you debuff a target with somebody like CPO Prime, now they have 30% less health for however many seconds. I think it's 3 seconds. So now anybody who hits that target within that 3 seconds is benefiting from them having 30% less health, right? So if that target is getting swarmed down by 8 different armies, well, now all 8 of those armies are benefiting from them having 30% less health. And so that's really great, because when you look at buffs in Rise of Kingdoms, which is kind of the counterpart to that, there's no buffs in the game that give 8 nearby friendly units a certain amount of stats, right? It doesn't happen. It's typically capped at 5, right? And so that's, you know, there's always going to be a cap to buffs, and beyond that, when you do get your maximum amount of buffs, the value of that buff depends on how many targets they are hitting, right? So if you buff 5 armies and all 5 of those armies are only hitting 1 target, well, that's going to give you 5 good battle reports, right? But if you have a debuff to 1 target and 8 people are hitting them, that's 8 good battle reports. Does it make sense? Now, don't get me wrong, it's not that debuffs are good and buffs are bad. No, buffs are very good. Okay, like these are not mutually exclusive things. But I would say if we were to look at the history of Rise of Kingdoms, you know, just like AoE versus single target, I would say debuffs are more powerful and more relevant to the meta, at least long term, than buffs, right? Another thing to look for, like I said before, is either a lower rage cycle, lower rage cost, or something like a lot of all damage, right? This is something that you find in commanders like Philip II, right, where they just give you a ton of all damage, which feels really, really good. And so all damage is great because it is a universal thing. As the name implies, it just boosts all your damage. No matter what type of damage it is, it will be relevant there. So your white numbers and your skill damage or smite damage or combat, whatever the damage is, it's going to apply there. It's kind of like it's just a force multiplier for everything. And another massive tip that I can give you guys when it comes to determining whether or not a commander is a must-have is literally just wait for the whales to test it. Seriously, like they're gonna get it anyway, because that's what they do. They like this game enough to just constantly get the new things and play with them, whether or not they're meta. Okay, and there will be a video, whether it's me, whether it's Jiskel, whether it's somebody else, there's gonna be a video about the latest greatest things, and it's gonna come out pretty soon after the new great things come into the game. The commanders, the formations, the equipment, whatever the upgrades are, there's gonna be videos about it, right? So if you could just wait a little bit, that patience is going to be rewarded, because you're going to be able to figure out, is this a commander that I should get or not, right? And this is one of the things that's always so funny when new commanders are revealed. A lot of times on day 1, like the moment that their skills are revealed, I'll make a video about it, and people are going to be in the comments like, oh, do you think I should expertise this commander? Oh, should I 5.5.1 them? And it's like, I know that people are like excited, right? And that's, so am I. That's why I make the video, right? But my advice is always telling people, like, even if the reveal is good, even if I make a video and I say, hey guys, this new commander looks absolutely busted, understand that that is just me using my in-game knowledge and applying it to the new commander. But we still need to see testing, obviously, right? There could be something about him that doesn't work, or maybe the wording of the skills is wrong, or whatever the case might be. There's interactions or synergies or lack thereof that we don't know until they're into the game. Like, you know, there's going to be times where I can speak with confidence, right? Like when Bai Chi was announced, I was like, oh yeah, like he's obviously, if you're using William Wallace with your Liu Che, you're not going to be using him anymore after this. Like it's so obvious, right? Now still wait for the testing, of course, right? But like sometimes it's more obvious than others. But like what I'm trying to say is just wait for the whales to max it. All right, collect as much data as you can from all your favorite YouTubers and all your favorite whales from all your different kingdoms and your favorite discords and all your resources from the internet. Collect all that information and then make the decision for yourself. By the way, here's a little secret tip for those of you that made it this far into the video. Okay, I think we are probably about between 1 and 3 weeks away from hearing news about new commanders. Okay, now this is not a leak, this is not insider information, this is just me going off of the dates that we have here on the calendar. Okay, I don't know if the next release is going to be leadership, engineering, or cavalry, or some combination of them. I have absolutely no idea, so that is all speculation, but I suspect the next commanders will be released sometime in mid to late September, which means we will probably start to hear news about them mid to late August. Okay, latest would be like first week of September, but by the time I post this video, we are probably a week and a half to 3.5 weeks away from hearing about new commanders. Okay, it could literally happen at any time, depending on if the developers are going to have a fast, average, or slow release cycle here. Usually a average release cycle is 70 days, a fast release cycle is about 56 days, a slow release cycle is about 84 days, and yeah, obviously that's not perfect. Sometimes it fluctuates with like different events and things like that. But yeah, learning about new commanders is gonna happen sooner than you think, so just keep that in mind. Always remember that patience is a virtue here, and that is why the most important, and this is, I need you to listen closely here, this is huge. Okay, this is the biggest. If I could instill one thing into the minds of free-to-plays and low spenders, this is it. Okay, do not invest in a legendary commander until you have 690 sculptures saved. Don't do it. I'm telling you, just don't do it. You might think, oh, I'm gonna have, by the time next KVK comes, if I, every day I just pump a couple sculptures into him, by the time KVK comes, I'll have him maxed, right? Maybe that's true, but what if they announce a new commander out of nowhere before your next KVK? And what if it's Emperor Chin? And then you're gonna be like, damn, I just pumped 380 sculptures into my whoever, and I should have saved him for Emperor Chin because he's clearly better. So that's why I'm saying patience is always going to be the #1 most important thing, especially for free-to-play players and low spenders. And the truth is, if it were easy to have patience, everyone would do it, right? It's hard to sit there and collect 480 legendary commander sculptures, and you're like, man, I really, if I just put them all in there right now, maybe I could use them for a little bit, you know what I mean? Like, I know it's the whole saying of like, oh, it's burning a hole in my pocket, right? You just got 50 bucks and oh, now I got money that's burning a hole in my pocket. I want to spend it. I want to spend it on something. Like, I got the money. I want to have some fun with it, right? It's the same sort of thing in Rise of Kingdoms with sculptures. I know you want to put them in somebody. You want to get that instant gratification of like, oh yeah, I got this really cool new thing. But I'm telling you, the best way to do it, and I know it's boring, it's grindy, but if you want the best of the best, you will be rewarded by having patience and saving 690 legendary commander sculptures. And really, the best thing to do if you're going to be dumping a ton of sculptures is investing in pairs of commanders that just immediately go well together. But again, for a free-to-play player, that means like once a year, right? Which is just that might not be practical. So I don't know. Anyway, guys, at this point I'm going off on a tangent, but I wanted to just make this video to talk about my thoughts on Emperor Chin as it relates to power creep, whether I think it's good for the game, bad for the game, and how you can succeed despite that. And truthfully, I feel like, is Emperor Chin a big jump in power in the meta? I would say he's a pretty big jump. Is he the biggest jump we've ever had? Maybe, right? Maybe. It's hard to say. It's a little bit fuzzy as we look back at some of these commanders. Like Guan Yu felt like a big jump. Nevsky felt like a big jump. Like those were big jumps. Emperor Chin is probably a bigger jump, but it's hard to say because his peers are also much stronger, right? Like Bai Chi Liu Che is still a great march, so it's hard to say. But my point is, power creep has been around, it's always going to be around, and there are ways to combat it, but it requires some patience. So guys, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Do you think Emperor Chin and his sort of power creep in the game is good for the game? Is it bad for the game? Or is it just par for the course? This is what we always expect. Let me know in the comment section below, and while you're down there, drop a thumbs up. It really helps out the channel a ton. It helps get this video out into the YouTube algorithm so other Rise of Kingdoms players might see it, and consider subscribing to the channel and clicking the bell to be notified the next time I upload a Rise of Kingdoms video. With that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been Omniarch. I will talk to you guys again soon. Peace.